NVIDIA has now released their RTX 3070 Ti. All good and well, but there in fact are a couple of things you should definitely know before buying such a graphics card, because depending on how you may want to look at it, we could indeed be talking of some sort of black sheep in NVIDIA's Ampere lineup. What I mean by that, you'll find out in today's video. The test object for today is yet another model by Gigabyte, namely the RTX 3070 Ti Gaming OC 8G. Although prices are starting to come down now, finally, there are still some issues with stock, depending on which country you live in. Over here in Europe, things are certainly improving. Still, prices still haven't entirely returned back to normal. So while NVIDIA's MSRP, the manufacturer's suggested retail price, would suggest $599 for an RTX 3070 Ti, in reality, you're easily spending $1,100, at least at the time of writing this video script. These $599 position themselves neatly in between those $699 for an RTX 3080 in theory and $499 you're meant to spend on an RTX 3070. So here's the question many will want to know the answer to. Does NVIDIA actually offer us performance that lies exactly in between the RTX 3070 and 3080? And was it really necessary to add yet another card to the existing lineup? The answer might be AMD's RX 6800. After all, in theory at least, you could grab such a card for $579 MSRP. Before we take a look at all that, I'd like to once again thank the kind and quick Spartan warrior Georgios over at the hardware shop Equipper for always giving it all to somehow get a hold on all these components needed for my reviews. Hashtag not sponsored. As so often, I paid for all this out of my own pocket. I'd like to keep this review a bit shorter than usual, or at least only focus on the really important topics, because let's be honest, in recent times I've taken a look at quite a few Gigabyte Gaming OC graphics cards, and Gigabyte's very own features tend to more or less always be the same. You're also given the option to register this model at Gigabyte's website to extend your warranty to a whopping 4 years. As always, Gigabyte's so-called WindForce 3X cooler featuring their triple fan setup comes into play, 2 of which are 90mm, 1 80mm. The center fan spins in the opposite direction to prevent turbulence, and the fans automatically turn themselves on and off depending on the graphics card's temperatures. We are talking of semi-passive cooling here. As for noise levels, for my standards, I can only report back with good news. The noise levels of their graphics cards, Gigabyte has managed to improve by a lot in recent years. Furthermore, every single aluminum heatsink is connected with 7 copper heat pipes. As usual with Gigabyte, we only get to see a plastic shroud, but admittedly, it's a fairly robust one, making a solid impression. The silver backplate, in fact, turns out to be out of metal though, with the usual cutout at the card's tail end. We are given the choice to switch between the OC and silent modes thanks to that onboard dual BIOS switch. And last but not least, the manufacturer has also equipped this model with some subtle RGB lighting. Now, if you were to ask me about my personal thoughts on the looks of this card, I'd say that aesthetically, I like this one a lot more than what Gigabyte has done with their oddly shaped RTX 3080 Ti, but it's clearly a matter of preference. Now here's the question. Technically speaking, what GPU is the RTX 3070 Ti closer to, the RTX 3080 or the 3070? Well, the GPU in the case of the 3070 Ti is the GA104, so the exact same one that comes into play for the regular RTX 3070. So there are our first indications of what might be awaiting us, but often there's more to that. I personally find it to be a bit of a bummer that NVIDIA, as so often, isn't very generous when it comes to VRAM capacities. Other than that RTX 3080 with 10GB to work with, we apparently need to content ourselves with the same 8GB we also get to see on a 3070. AMD, on the other hand, even equips their RX 6800 with a whopping 16GB. Still, it needs to be said that 8GB are still very acceptable, generally speaking. It's just that I would have expected a bit more in this price range. That would have probably cost NVIDIA some extra money though, especially with a GA104 based GPU, and that's what NVIDIA surely wants to avoid. However, they have carried over the faster GDDR6X memory from the RTX 3080 to the 3070 Ti. This now increases the memory speed from 14 to a whopping 19 gigabits per second when comparing 3070 against 3070 Ti. Even GPU and boost clocks seem higher on paper at least. The amount of shading units compared to the regular RTX 3070 has only increased by a mere 4% though, which certainly is not a lot. Especially when keeping in mind the RTX 3080 comes along with a total of 8,704 shader units. The TDP has increased from 220 to 290 watts. So it should slowly start to make sense as to how they've squeezed out more performance with these kind of specs. So there's now 2 8-pin PCIe power connectors required. Now let's quickly compare the achieved clock speeds. First off, the duel between RTX 3070 and 3070 Ti, then followed by the 3080. In the case of the 3070, in-game in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we are looking at an average of 1980 MHz. With the 3070 Ti, we are surprisingly seeing slightly lower GPU clocks of 1920 MHz on average. That sure does surprise. The RTX 3080, on the other hand, clocks in at about 1860 MHz on average. We are now finally getting pretty close to the benchmarks. As usual, all tests will be carried out with my trusty test system, consisting of an AMD Ryzen 9 5950X, the very reliable ASRock X570PG Velocita motherboard, and of course the Deepcool Castle 240EX AIO liquid cooler. Once again, I'd like to give a quick shoutout and thanks to Enermax for kindly providing me with their Max Titan 1250 watt 80 plus titanium certified power supply. Just in case I happen to run into any PSU related limitations, I certainly have a heavy duty solution ready to be used. Just to let you know, I am not being paid for this shoutout whatsoever, still I want to remain fully transparent towards you, which is why I'm marking this section of the video as an ad. Thank you, Enermax. And now we are ready. The following are my test results I achieved with today's RTX 3070 Ti. Enjoy! get one thing straight right away, when it comes to the offered performance, in the case of the RTX 3070 Ti, we're definitely talking of a technically very powerful graphics card, of course. This, however, doesn't necessarily mean that such a card can be recommended to anyone, because I do see a few problematic zones here. Other than many, including myself, initially expected, the 3070 Ti in terms of performance is much closer to a regular RTX 3070 than it is to a 3080. In fact, other than the MSRP would suggest, there's no perfect in-between for the 3070 Ti. Unfortunately, as said, the 3070 Ti tends to lean a lot more towards a 3070, which my test results confirm. Now don't get me wrong, the RTX 3070 Ti offers incredible performance and on average is faster than an AMD RX 6800 non-XT. I believe the RX 6800 for quite some time has been a thorn in NVIDIA's eyes. They just had to deal with that threat in one way or another. But have they really dealt with it? In my opinion, no. Sure, the RX 6800 is slightly slower than the 3070 Ti, but depending on the game titles, Team Red's GPU sometimes takes home victories as well. AMD's weaknesses still remain ray tracing, which probably won't really change anytime soon, and a decent equivalent to DLSS, although that AMD is starting to tackle already. AMD has already managed to impress many of us with their recently unveiled upscaling technology going by the name of Fidelity FX Super Resolution, or FSR for short. Implementing that technology or feature, in theory, shouldn't even be too hard for game developers. Although from a technical standpoint, we can't really compare DLSS with FSR, but at the end of the day, there's nothing else to compare with for us consumers. And even though I was a big skeptic of AMD FSR, I now truly start to see great potential in it, even and especially for consoles. But well, I digress. What I find to be a real bummer is the fact that NVIDIA for the RTX 3070 Ti didn't just go for a slimmed down variant of the GA102 GPU, also used for the RTX 3080 for instance. That way we would have been way closer to 3080 performance, and we certainly would have achieved that golden mean by simply adjusting the number of shader units. The way it is now, there's a bitter aftertaste, for me at least. We all have slightly different opinions on this topic. Unfortunately, even the power consumption increases by almost 50 watts over a regular RTX 3070. So in terms of power efficiency, not exactly NVIDIA's best job in recent times, especially when considering the somewhat comparable RX 6800 only draws 320 watts. We are talking of total system power draw, by the way. Between the RTX 3070 Ti and RX 6800, in my case, there's a power draw difference of 126 watts. Even an RX 6800 XT consumes less power than the 3070 Ti does, however, deliver performance somewhat on par with NVIDIA's RTX 3080. And now hold on tight, even the RX 6900 XT flagship card's power draw by AMD is slightly lower than that of an RTX 3070 Ti. Although that is also somewhat dependent on the AIB, board partner, and the edition in question. Gigabyte seems to generally go for higher power limits, obviously driving up the power consumption that way. The temperatures, on the other hand, the Windforce 3X cooler is handling extraordinarily well, even at fairly low noise levels. I know I'm repeating myself, but in conclusion, the issue with the RTX 3070 Ti is that the MSRP is set too high in my humble opinion. If you're asking me, it makes a whole lot more sense to just pick up a regular RTX 3070 or 3080 at official pricing if needed. The 3070 Ti simply is way too close to a regular 3070 performance-wise, and the MSRP would suggest otherwise. So please keep that in mind when planning on getting yourselves an RTX 3070 Ti. Other than that, all in all, a very good graphics card. As so often, we are only rarely dealing with bad hardware. It's usually the pricing that goes along with it that has the power to make it a bad deal. With that being said, thank you so much for sticking around for so long, and until next time.